Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning in the States. Thank you for joining us after a long Thanksgiving weekend. Our today paper launch webinar is dedicated to the question of how to tackle discrimination against Roma women and girls in Central and Eastern Europe in general, and in Hungary in particular. My name is Hegedüs. I work as Senior Fellow in charge of the Engaging Central Europe program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. And I'm warmly welcoming our today's three speakers. First and foremost, Marina Csikós, the author of the today presented paper, who, aside of being a GMF ReThink.CEE fellow and a CEU Gender Studies alumna, also works as expert and Roma rights rapporteur for organizations like the Council of Europe, or ODIHR, and she's also co-founder of the feminist collective of Romani gender experts. Marina, welcome. I also would like to introduce Anna Carballo, the head of European and International Affairs at FAGIC, the Federation of Roma Associations in Catalonia, and she's working for the organizations since 2011, and she's also a PhD candidate on the issue of the Roma Holocaust. Anna, welcome. And last but not least, also, I would like to introduce you Marc Kiwit, who is a policy officer in the Roma coordination team of DG Just at the European Commission. And before joining the Guardian of the Treaties, Marc worked as a policy officer at the Committee of the Regions and as researcher at the Heidelberg Academy of Sciences and Humanities. Marc, thank you for being with us today. In a previous life, I started my career working on the international protection of national and ethnic minorities. And I remember very well the enthusiasm that surrounded the drafting of the EU Roma Framework Strategy around 2010-2011. More than a decade later, that previous enthusiasm appears to be particularly naive. European societies failed to make significant steps towards tackling discrimination against Roma people, and they also failed to mainstream this question at the national and European political agenda. Facing multiple forms of discrimination, the situation of Roma women and girls would require special attention in all documents aiming at the fostering of equality of Roma people. However, due to the spread of illiberal tendencies, including anti-gender sentiments in several countries in Central and Eastern Europe, actually, the representation of Roma women and girls in key national integration strategies is not necessarily better than a decade ago. Focusing on a unique country, Hungary, Marina's policy paper flashes out how Hungarian integration strategies address the discrimination of Roma women and girls, and it also analyzes how the official approach might impact their rights and equal treatment. Regarding the housekeeping rules of this event, Marina will present her paper's main findings in 15 to 20 minutes, followed by Anna's and Marc's comments in 10 to 15 minutes each. Approximately after 45 minutes, we will go into the Q&A, and I would like to ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to pose your questions either in the Q&A function or the chat function of Zoom, or your comments to the panelists. I also would like to remind you that the event is recorded and will be available online at the YouTube channel of the German Marshall Fund. And last but not least, I would like to mention that Marina's paper has been part of GMF's ReThink.CEE fellowship program, which supports innovative projects conducted by the next generation of policy analysts and civic activists from the Central and Eastern European region and the Western Balkans. The application to the next year fellowship program will be opened in just a couple of days. So please follow GMF's Engaging Central Europe program in social media. I will just share our handles in minutes in the chat if you would like to be informed about this fellowship opportunity. And having said that, I wouldn't like to abuse your time further. So Marina, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Dear Anna and Marc, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to be a discussant of my paper, regardless of your busy schedule. And thank you so much for the German Marshall Fund, especially Daniel, Nicolas, and Elaptina for your assistance and support during this process. In 2020, I felt the need to engage more with policy analysis, since this was one of the fields which I haven't really explored yet. I was really happy to see the call of GMF and the topic of the fellowship, which was ReThink Central Eastern Europe, as Daniel mentioned earlier. So I decided to apply for the call. Researching about Roma women and their status in the national Roma strategies nicely matched the fellowships, since there is a great need to rethink how Europe perceives Roma women, how policies are made about Roma people, and especially women. As a certified gender expert, as a Roma feminist activist, my aim was to offer a very different analysis about how Roma women were targeted in the national Roma strategies. I wanted to offer an analysis which was produced by a Roma woman, a gender expert, and a feminist activist, which is still a very rare thing in the European policy discourse, unfortunately. The paper also aimed to explore the weaknesses and strengths of the EU Roma frameworks and the Hungarian national social integration strategies, and also to encourage the European Commission and the Hungarian government to make improvements in the future. But let me start with the short presentation of the paper. In the beginning of the paper, of course, first I explained in detail the situation of Roma women and girls in the European Union by using the data of the Fundamental Rights Agency, Second European Union Minorities and Discrimination Survey from 2019. Due to the limited time, I will not go into details, but we can definitely see from the survey that Roma women and girls face intersectional discrimination in all areas of lives, such as education, employment, or health. They lack the most the equal opportunities to quality education and healthcare. They face the most discrimination in everyday lives. Therefore, the need to address their needs is extremely important when drafting any kind of policies, and especially when it comes to inclusion strategies. Since 2007, we can experience a growing EU attention towards Roma issues. In 2009, a European platform for Roma integration was created, which consisted of several CSOs, member state governments, and international and EU institutions working on Roma inclusion. Due to the increased commitment of some of the member states and the EU institutions, there has been some improvement in the situation of Roma Europe-wide. In 2011, the European Commission, acknowledging the unacceptable situation of the Roma and its responsibility to improve it, issued an EU Roma framework for national Roma integration strategies up to 2020. In this document, the European Commission requested all member states to develop and implement targeted strategies, as well as to devote sufficient resources to promote Roma integration in 4 priority areas. I am sure that you all know this: health, housing, education, and employment. This document stated that it was the responsibility of the EU and its member states to improve the situation of the Roma, since they have the political, financial, and structural resources to do so. Roma people, as citizens of the member states, should enjoy the same rights as non-Roma ones. However, the reality is that Roma people do not have full access to fundamental rights still nowadays, and they face serious obstacles in this regard. Even though the EU Roma framework acknowledged that the member states should make sure that the Roma enjoy the same rights as others do, it lacked the discussion about what the specific responsibilities the member states should have. Moreover, the document is completely silent about racism and how it has become an integral part of the European structures, including the European Union itself. Rather, the EU Roma framework presented a patronizing approach and implied that the Roma were not able to solve the Roma issue by themselves, which is why they needed the help of the EU. This approach is not a unique one. The EU used very similar ones with regards to gender, LGBTQ, and the people with disabilities when it comes to strategies. So these are just a few examples. Please don't misunderstand me. At the same time, it is of course the member states' responsibility to have, such a commitment. However, when thinking about empowerment of marginalized communities, we should not treat them as people incapable of change, but rather partners in this process. And this patronizing approach will support the racist notion only that Roma people are incapable of change and that they are passive. Now I would like to turn to the conclusions about the two Hungarian national social integration strategies, if you don't mind. So the efforts by Hungary to address the needs of Roma women and girls through its two integration strategies raise several concerns. A gender analysis of the strategies show that there has been some progress, given that in Hungary gender equality is in trouble and does not seem to be a priority for the government. The simple fact of mentioning and addressing some of the issues that Roma women face and paying special attention to minority women shows that there is some hope. However, a close look at the content of the strategies and at the planned or already implemented measures for Roma women and girls shows that there have been serious false assumptions, such as blaming Roma culture and traditions for the lack of opportunities for the Roma girls, a lack of involvement of Roma women in designing the strategies. There were, neither Roma gender experts or Roma women organizations involving in this process. And there is also a lack of interaction with Roma-led CSOs, or at least they consulted mostly with government-friendly organizations. And there is a latent sexism, racism, and homophobia. For instance, there is no mention of anti-Gypsyism and its effects. There is no planned measures on this regard, and also assuming that all Roma women and girls are heterosexuals. And there is no special attention to Roma trans women, for instance, and lesbians who might be even more marginalized than heterosexual Roma women and girls. In the first strategy, Roma women are mentioned in the section titled "The Situation of Roma Women," gave the impression that they are somehow separate from the society and need very targeted measures that concerns them. Yet early pregnancy, equal access to healthcare and public services, and better employment opportunities are concerns not only for Roma women, but also for non-Roma women, Hungarian women living in poverty and disadvantaged circumstances. However, because of the additional oppression Roma women face due to racism, they do need more targeted measures that focus on the racism dimension as well as the gender one. Therefore, a combination of gender mainstreaming approach and an intersectional one that more purposefully tackles racism and gender would be the most effective way to help Roma women. A gender mainstreaming should focus not only on gender as a social category, but also to tackle gender as a synonym for women, which is not true. Gender identity is in a strong multi-angled relationship with all these social constructions that should be emphasized in an integration strategy. When it comes to the new EE Roma framework, the current one that we are having now, 9 years after the publication of the EU strategic framework for Roma integration and after the end of the first implementation period of the national Roma strategies, the European Commission adopted in 2020 a new framework for the following 10 years. This title suggests that the EU's approaches and objectives have shifted from integration to political participation and equality. The document states that while significant improvement has been made in the fields of early school education and early school living, there are still fields where the situation of Roma had stagnated or even gotten worse in the previous 10 years. These include segregation of Roma pupils in schools, employment, segregated housing, and many more. Though there is no particular mention of achievements and failures of the first EU Roma strategy when it comes to the situation of Roma girls and women. From the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights survey findings from 2009, there is a clear picture of the differences between them and the Roma men and boys. One of the improvements in the new strategy is that an intersectional approach is recognized as the only way to effectively tackle discrimination. The European Commission used the working definition of intersectionality of the European Institute for Gender Equality, which is mentioned above. What we can see in the EU framework is that under Objective 5, the European Commission has set the target by 2030, at least 45% of Roma women should be in paid employment, which is a very promising number. With this target, the aim is to cut by half the gender employment gap between Roma women and men. Another area under Objective 6, to improve Roma health and increase effective equal access to quality health, care and social services. The focus is on increasing the life expectancy of Roma women and men, makes a specific reference to the goal for women. When it comes to the new strategic framework, what we can see is that a gender perspective or intersectional approach is completely missing from the rest of the objectives. So as we can see, Objective 5 and 6 includes Roma women and different goals targeting to them, but in the rest of the objectives, it's completely missing. By Roma women and girls are mentioned here and there in the strategic framework. There is a lack of discussion on how intersectionality and gender equality should be addressed in national strategies. The European Commission has attempted to highlight these issues, but how to address them is missing, which makes the new document quite weak when it comes to addressing the special needs of Roma women and girls. And now I would like to turn to the new the Hungarian National Social Integration Strategy, because as we know that in Hungary, we don't have a dedicated Roma strategy. It's more for the whole society and their marginalized communities' social integration to the society. In September 2021, after some delay, Hungary adopted its social integration strategy. While the new EU strategic framework includes many novelties, the new Hungarian strategy does not improve the previous one much. The main goal remains to tackle poverty and to reduce the disadvantages faced by poor people mainly. So it's not only Roma, but basically disadvantaged people and people living under the poverty line. While it is also stated there will be more emphasis on climate change, mental health, digitalization, and cross-border cooperation, which are very promising, let's say. While all these areas are very, very important, fighting against anti-Gypsyism and increasing political and civic participation receive less attention in the new strategy, regardless of what the EU actually recommended. The new strategy states that equal access to public services for Roma women remains a horizontal concern. Increasing the access of Roma women to healthcare and their employment in public institutions also remains an important element in the strategy. The strategy has one of the main goals to pay particular attention to the prevention of early school leaving among Roma girls and their further education. These goals mainly will be implemented by the activities which the government put into place in the first strategy already, and which have actually received mixed feedback from the Roma Civil Monitor and many other experts on social inclusion. The new strategy did not improve either when it comes to its approach. The situation is explained first, and then the solution and plan measures are presented, without any attempt to explain the origins of the problems, or at least acknowledging the effects of anti-Gypsyism, sexism, and exploitation, which actually would be very, very important when it comes to empowering marginalized groups, and even, one country to acknowledge how it contributed actually in the marginalization of these groups. However, there is an improvement when it comes to paying more attention to mental and physical health. which most probably was a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the issues which are raised throughout the whole world. To improve the health condition of the population, the strategy aims to make healthcare more accessible to those who live in the better socioeconomic situations, including the Roma as well. So it's not, again, not specifically for Roma, but Roma somehow will be beneficiaries of these measures. These measures, which here too are a continuation of those in the first strategy, include prevention programs, improving the infrastructure of the hospitals, and public health screening tests, which we can see that, you know, like nowadays you can really hear about in the news that hospitals are in horrible situations and people are complaining that they don't have anywhere to go, and you know, so we hope that it somehow the plan measures will be really implemented on the field, but we can see that in the last 10 years it's really not what we expected. The new strategy also states that the vaccination of Roma girls against human papilloma virus is almost complete in Hungary, which, let's say, it's a major achievement. Another important improvement could be noticed when it comes to nurturing Roma culture and identity. However, due to the deep-rooted racism of Hungary that it has towards the Roma people, it becomes somehow problematic regarding ethnic education, which mostly refers to cultural, historical, and social education of the Roma. The new strategy again highlights the Bariseg program, which educates Roma girls on special cultural and social Roma characteristics, such as the family roles of Roma women and early family formation. So what we can see is that when it comes to Roma culture and nurturing the Roma identity, what we can see that is that the government plans to more focus on how Roma women should behave in the family and why it is so important to have a family. Even, for instance, you are a Roma trans woman or a lesbian, and maybe you don't even have in mind that you would like to create a heterosexual family. The strategy implies that there are cultural and social characteristics, as I said, that affect Roma women and girls in their communities, and therefore that they should be assisted by an outsider mentor who helps them to overcome these characteristics. The strategy does not state clearly what these characteristics are actually that the Roma have and why Roma women and girls cannot improve and you know, they are not allowed to enter education. But throughout it gives a sense of what this refers to. In mainstream society, Roma culture and traditions are viewed as backward, oppressive for women and girls, and that and it is not progressive at all. And I would say even go further, and that these are violent characteristics that we have as Roma people. This is in the Hungarian sentiment. And based on these assumptions, non-Roma society thinks that Roma girls and women need saviors in the form of mentors, who are most of them are non-Roma, of course, who guide them through these social and cultural characteristics. This kind of approach is very racist and sexist because it makes false assumptions about Roma traditions without understanding their broader political, cultural, social, and economic context, and also because it ignores the agency of Roma women and girls. And here I also have to mention that for when it comes to these Roma characteristics that are presented in the strategy, there is no scientific, you know, scholarly cited material, so there is basically no evidence to write down all these things. It's just somehow there and everyone should accept it. Before the conclusions, I still have to mention two good practices. The Roma Civil Monitor was a pilot project initiated by the European Parliament and managed by the European Commission that ran from March 2017 until March 2020. And it still continues until nowadays, actually. The objective was to contribute to strengthening the monitoring mechanisms of the implementation of the national Roma integration strategies through systematic civil society monitoring. One important element of the civil society monitoring was that it has independent status. The project also aims to enhance civil society monitoring in two key ways: by developing the policy monitoring capacities of the CSOs and by supporting the preparation of high quality, comprehensive annual monitoring reports as well. And in the previous mechanism, so from 2011 until 2020, there were basically three reports that was made by the Hungarian coalition when it comes to monitoring the situation of Roma girls and women in Hungary. These reports highlighted many issues which I already mentioned before, but they also focused on monitoring the implemented projects and activities, which was extremely useful because me as a researcher, I couldn't, go to the field and look at the numbers, look at the outcomes of the implemented project that they already had. So in these reports, you can actually just visit the Roma Civil Monitors page and look up all the Hungarian related reports and also from the other countries as well. So you can learn about these projects in the paper and also in the RCM reports as well, as I mentioned. Even though the RCM has monitored some projects which targeted Roma women and girls, there is still a lack of intersectional approach and gender sensitivity in the rest of the RCM reports in general, unfortunately. Therefore, it would be very, very important for the RCM Hungary in the future to pay more attention to these. Another good practice or even possible solution would be the strategy on the advancement of Roma women and girls from 2014 to 2020, which was written by the International Roma Women Network, PANYALIPE. And this strategy was written in 2016, facilitated by the Council of Europe. And the reason why I chose this as a best practice, and maybe also for the Commission and other actors, the Hungarian government to look at, because actually this report was written by Roma women experts and Roma women activists. And it's a very comprehensive strategy. You will also find it online or even in the paper. And just I would like to mention 6 objectives that they focus on. These are combating racism and anti-Gypsyism and gender stereotypes against Roma women and girls. The second objective is preventing and combating various forms of violence against Roma women and girls. The third one is guaranteeing equal access to public services for Roma women and girls. Then we have ensuring access to justice for Roma women. And the last one, achieving adequate and meaningful participation of Roma women in political and public decision making, which is extremely important also. And the last one is mainstreaming gender and Roma women in all of official policies and measures. So I think it would be very important also to look at these documents and also what the findings of the Roma Civil Monitor, because we can see that there are good practices out there. We have already documents which are very useful, and they are also very practical. So it's not that policies, for instance, it would be impossible to work with them. So I would really recommend to work on this. However, when it comes to the PANYALIPE strategy, it should be also noted that there is a lack of understanding and also acknowledgement when it comes to non-heterosexual Roma women and girls. And also there should be, if someone decides, the Hungarian government, for instance, would decide to work with that, then it would be also very important, first of all, to look at it, how non-heterosexual Roma women and girls would fit in this whole Roma women strategy. And the second one is special attention to even more marginalized groups within the Roma women community, like Roma trans women and people who are human trafficked, for instance, or Roma children who were victims of human trafficking, or for instance, Roma women and girls who are living in segregated areas would be also very, very important, because these groups of Roma women and girls, they face additional marginalization. So that would be very, very important to address as well. So now I would like to turn to the conclusion very shortly. So the efforts by Hungary to address the needs of Roma women and girls through its 2 integration strategies raised several concerns. A gender analysis of the strategies shows that there has been some progress, given that in Hungary, gender equity is in trouble and does not seem to be a priority for the government. The simple fact of mentioning and addressing some of the issues is very important. And we can see that the case of Hungary is not a unique one. There are similar problems in other member states as well. For instance, implementing the recommendations below would therefore lead to an improvement of not only Hungary's Roma strategy, but the EU as well. In order to better address the needs of Roma women and girls in Hungary, the government should adopt a strategy on the advancement of Roma women and girls to its local context, as I mentioned, by reworking it from Roma women experts from diverse backgrounds, such as also sex workers, trans women, lesbian women, rural women. As Hungary is part of the Roma Civil Monitoring Initiative, the European Commission Directorate General for Justice and Consumers, as its managing entity, should develop and fund clear guidelines for the RCM on how to conduct gender analysis of national Roma strategies, their implementations, and their monitoring. These guidelines should be written by Roma women and LGBT experts as well from diverse backgrounds. The European Commission should define minimum standards and clear indicators that specifically target Roma women and girls, and use its political influence to make Hungary and other member states adopt these. There has been a great work invested into improving the situation of Roma women by the EU institutions, Europe's Roma civil society, Roma and pro-Roma experts, and national governments, and that has influenced, of course, Hungary. However, this is still not enough. It is not enough to mention Roma women and girls in strategies. It is counterproductive to rely on old and false assumptions about Roma culture and traditions. It is not right to forget about Roma lesbian women, bisexuals, trans women, and other Roma women from the LGBTQA community. If national integration strategies leave out repeatedly certain groups of people, there will never be a true whole dedication and commitment to improving the situation of Roma women. Roma women, even just taking the example of Hungary, form a very diverse group in terms of the situation they face, which should determine what kind of approach and measures need to be taken to improve their situation. There is no one-size-fits-all approach, of course, toward any minority issues, because the problems and the complex are very structural and complex. While there are no perfect strategies, governments have to make sure that they do their best. To obtain effective results, Hungary's authorities have to work with Roma gender experts and invest more into intersectional approaches, methodologies, and knowledge as well. Until this happens, Hungary will remain an unequal country for Roma women and girls, unfortunately. And here I would like to stop my presentation. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I'm looking forward to the remarks of Anna and Marc.
Thank you so much, Marina, for this excellent presentation, and you really provided us a lot of food for thought for the discussion and also the Q&A. But at that point, I would like to turn to Anna, because you are practically leading the international work of one of the largest Western European regional Roma federation. And I think it's particularly interesting how Marina's findings from Hungary resonate with your experience from Catalonia. So we are very much looking forward to your comments. Over to you.
Yes, exactly. I mean, when I was reading Marina's paper, I mean, I was also thinking about how many similarities, you know, with many other European countries, not only in Central and European countries, but also in Western countries, you know. And I was reading your paper, I was writing many questions to open the discussion also, because of course, I mean, I cannot agree more with your conclusions. And I think we all agreed about the intersectional approach is needed, you know, in order to tackle not only discrimination, but also to focus on Roma women and girls, you know. And I really like when you start about the importance of the Roma strategies and how they see from integration to inclusion, equality, and participation. I really hate the word integration. You know, I know a lot of people is using it, but I always say integrate to what? To what the majority society wants. Maybe Roma people don't want to integrate to that, you know? So it's also better to speak about inclusion and not about integration. And I think it's, with the new framework, at least the name is more correct, even if a lot of things are missing. When we're talking about equality, talking about the European framework, I think is focused more on equality between Roma and non-Roma than not on gender equality, that I think is also missing. That's why the national strategies, even if guidelines, they don't have common standards, all these kind of things is missing. But let's because I have a lot of notes and I want to go like in line. We all know about the importance, okay, of the national strategies. I think even the situation of Hungary could be different from many other countries regarding with the government, the political context, you know, with the gender situation and also the LGBTQA plus community and many other issues. I have questions, okay? So in some point regarding the first strategy, Roma women and girls were mentioned in this situation of the Roma women and girls. It was like 1.5 pages or 2 pages regarding them. And it's true, I agree with you when it says it looks like they are separate from the society, but at the same time, you mentioned that it's important to have special measures and actions targeting Romani women and girls. So my question is how to approach, how to mention them, but not only mentioning is enough, you know, how to reach, what is your recommendation? Because for me, this is missing. Yes, we talk about the international approach, but if we don't want to talk about Romani women and girls as excluded from the society, but at the same time, not only mentioning them, how it's supposed to be covered, you know? Something important that I don't know, and this is also important, if the strategy in Hungary is also linked or connect to any other plans, national plans, as if it's any gender plan in Hungary, if it's any LGBTQA plus plan in Hungary, if it's any other employment plan in Hungary that is also targeting Roma, and if they are all connect or they all work in a separate way, because this is also a negative effect in improving the situation of the Romani people in Hungary or in Europe, you know, how if the plans are connected or not. Something I'm missing from your paper, and I really wanted to ask you, we are all the time talking about 4 priorities, is health, education, employment, and housing. But you didn't even mention housing. We are talking about segregated housing and about women in rural areas, but you didn't analyze the housing field from this gender perspective, and I think is also very important, you know, how this affects Romani women, you know, how segregated housing affects Romani women to the access to this public service, to the access to health, to access to employment and education, you know, and how is the housing also affecting Romani women, because we know also the roles, gender roles between women and men is also related to the distribution of the house, you know, and as many Romani people are living in these disadvantaged areas and housing conditions are not the best, how this also affects to Romani women and to Romani women health and the girls also. So this is something that I don't know, because you took as a model the first survey in 2019 that they don't mention housing and you follow, or also because the national Hungarian strategy doesn't mention anything with Roma women and girls related to housing, but I think maybe you can do some kind of contribution to this aspect. Regarding education, I mean, we cannot say much. I mean, you mentioned it, you know, everything, how the government tries to blend also Roma culture and traditions, on how the situation of Romani women and girls is without not taking any responsibility, without not even talking about anti-racism or racism. And I really like it because you mentioned the diversity of the Romani women and girls also, you know, and you were very clear all the time about trans woman, lesbian woman. That is very important, you know, because usually it's forgetting. But I didn't read anything about migrant woman, you know. I don't know how is the situation of migrant Roma woman in Hungary, because you are mentioned about homophobia, racism, anti-Gypsyism, you know, but I'm missing how it's affecting also xenophobia, aporophobia. I don't know if it's the right word in English, you know, the hate to poor people that is many times confusing and related to Roma culture, and how this is also affecting the Romani woman. Education and employment are very linked, you know. That's why also I wanted to bring the housing factor, because access to employment is also to do in where are you living, disadvantaged areas where many Roma women might not have driving license and they don't have access to public transport or to access to these places. But something important for me is about health, you know, and it's important because the life expectancy of 10 years less is, I think, in the whole Europe. We did just a case study in Spain, in other 6 European countries, and these 10 years of life expectancy less from the Romani community is, I think, in almost all the country. But you didn't mention, or you mentioned some of them, how the social determinants affect these health inequalities, you know. It's about income and social status, employment and working conditions that you mentioned, education, that childhood experience, physical environment, social support, healthy behaviors, access to health service, gender, culture, and racism. These all are social determinants that affect the health, but how the health of Romani women, and even worse than in some cases of men, you know. And this is also related to the individual place in the society, and we know the place of Romani woman is even worse than the men, you know. But then you mentioned also the health mediators, that people is not using them. But then I read about this growing project that it tries to train 1,000 women, you know, Romani women to have employment in this public service. But then you have these health mediators that nobody's using them. Are these training to become also mediators, something different? If people is not using them, could it have any effect on the improvement of health, you know? What else I have? I want to be fast. I don't know if it's also about disabled women that you mentioned sometimes, you know, but for me it's like it's not clear all the time, you know, and I know intersexual approaches about it, but I think sometimes we have to be very clear. Even if you mentioned in the last strategy, this physical and mental health is included maybe because of the COVID, disabled women because of the situation, these housing areas and everything also face more multiple discrimination, and for me this is also missing, you know. I guess it's because the Hungarian national strategy doesn't mention them, but I was waiting from you also some kind of recommendations, you know, from them, and just going quickly about the these projects. I really like the idea you brought also about the Roma Civil Monitor and the Penjalipe projects as a good practice, but you also criticize them, and I think this is a very good approach about this gender sensitivity, you know, from the Roma Civil Monitor. But then I would like to ask you, who is participating on the design of the national strategy, because you are talking about the lack of participation of Romani women or Romani gender experts. You know, who is participating? And not about the 2011 one, because we know by that time there was no many participation, but in the last one, then the guidelines from the European Commission was a lot of participation, and the participation of the community. So if we are talking about the lacking of all this kind of thing, how was the participation? Who participated? Why we have this practical approach, and it's lacking the approach from the community, or maybe it was from a community men but no woman, and that's why it's missing this gender approach, you know. But this is also important, and I would like to hear more about you, especially with Romani women and on the health thing. If for you it's enough about talking about this early pregnancy, because I think it could be a problem on Romani women, but it's more focused to poverty than as a Roma issue, you know, but it's always linked to Roma women. And I think they are also very important, as you mentioned, the sex workers, trafficking, all these kind of things that for me, what I mean, your conclusions are clear, you know, that's for sure, and I think we all agree with you. But I'm missing from you that you know more the context, the Hungarian context. It's not your role, of course, because you're only analyzing, you know, the place of the Romani woman and the strategy. But I would like to hear from you about on this field of housing, education, employment, and health. What is missing about regarding your knowledge about the situation of the Romani woman and girls? What is missing? You know, what is needed? Because the strategy has been already adopted. How to change that? You know, could it be any chance to change the measures already adopted in the next period? Because if not, Marina, why we need it? I mean, if it's not going to be any change, or how to advocate to change, I don't know if it's from the Roma Civil Monitor. We can see from your analysis that it's not going to work, or the effect is going to be practically zero regarding the situation of the Romani women and girls, you know. So for me, I would like to hear from you some more recommendations. What is missing? What not only about the intersectional approach, and of course we all agree with that, but how is the real situation and how it has to be changed, of course, with the participation of gender experts. And I hope I've been clear, and I don't know if I took, but I also open to the discussion later. And congratulations, of course.
Thank you so much, Anna, for your great comments. And Marc, I think very few people on planet Earth have such a comprehensive overview about the different national integration strategies of EU member states than you do. And against that background, my question would be that first, how do you see Marina's findings from the perspective of the European Commission? And second, how representative or unique are findings based on a Hungarian case study from an overall European perspective? You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for this kind introduction. And well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this event. And above all, congratulations and thank you, Marina, for this very interesting and insightful presentation. As you will know, on the side of the European Commission, we are currently also finalizing our own assessment of the national Roma strategic frameworks. And in this context, I found it really helpful and also thought-provoking to first of all read and then today also to listen to your in-depth analysis, whereas on our side, well, I would maybe be a bit less flattering than Daniel has just been. We are certainly looking at all the strategies and at all the angles, but then maybe we are also not going as much into depth as Marina has been able to do in her paper, focusing specifically on one member state and on the situation of Roma women and girls. So indeed, I thought you explained really well the interaction between the different Hungarian national strategies, the older one and then the current one, and also the European policy context. And I think, well, maybe just to say I'm not currently able to say so much about our assessment of the strategies because it's still going to be adopted, and so it's a bit difficult at the current point to say to what extent the Hungarian national strategy is representative of member states' strategies. For this, I would still ask you for some more patience to wait for the adoption of our assessment report. But I think what could be interesting is to focus a bit more on the EU policy context in which the Hungarian strategy and also the other national Roma strategic frameworks were developed, which you already addressed quite a bit in your presentation, Marina. And as you have mentioned, the new EU Roma strategic framework was adopted in October 2020. And then afterwards, the member states adopted the Council recommendation on Roma equality, inclusion and participation in March last year. And this Council recommendation was adopted unanimously, which can be seen as encouraging concerning member states' commitment to Roma equality and inclusion. And in this context, I would maybe like to remind you of some of the new elements now in the new Roma strategic framework, which maybe then also can help grasp a bit better to what extent the ambition both of the framework and of the Council recommendation and the objectives are reflected at national level in the national strategies. And as Marina has already mentioned, the previous framework focused more or mostly on reducing social exclusion, specifically in the sectoral areas which we talked about. And this new Roma strategic framework aims to be more comprehensive through a three-pillar approach, in which social and economic inclusion is still maintained as important, but complemented by promoting equality and fostering participation, what Marina also mentioned. And in line with this broader approach, the new framework has defined seven objectives, 3 horizontal ones, one on equality, one on inclusion, and one on participation. And then it still maintains the 4 sectoral objectives on education, employment, health, and housing, recognizing that there still remain challenges to be addressed and solved. And then for each of these 7 objectives, the framework for the first time proposes quantitative headline targets, which I would like to remind express the minimum progress that we hope to achieve by 2030. And Marina has already mentioned the one headline target that has a gender dimension, the one on reducing the gender employment gap. But beyond this just one quantitative target, the framework as a whole, I think, gives a stronger focus to diversity among Roma and aims to ensure that the national strategic frameworks meet the specific needs of different groups, including Roma women, youth, children, migrants and EU mobile Roma, LGBTI people, older Roma, etc. And concerning what we expect from member states, I think that this diversity focus, while it remains general in the framework, of course, is reflected in the common features that all member states should address in their national strategies. Member states are explicitly asked to ensure that their policies reflect the needs of different groups through an intersectional approach, keeping in mind how different aspects of identity can combine to exacerbate discrimination. And member states are also asked to set targets to ensure that diversity in terms of, for example, age, gender, or sexual orientation is reflected. And it is true that the framework itself does not define specific measures for that all member states should take on board, and this can be a point of criticism. But I would like to remind also that the framework itself is not a strategy or action plan, but aims to provide a framework for national strategies where the Commission can provide guidance, support, and can also monitor, but the competences for most of the relevant policy areas lie with the member states. And so the solution was to adopt a common but differentiated approach, allowing member states to address the specific challenges they are facing. Looking at the Council recommendation, which I mentioned earlier, this Council recommendation goes a bit more into concrete details and sets out specific measures that member states should adopt in their national frameworks. I'll give you just a few examples, and I would be interested also in your thoughts, Marina, in where you would see well, gaps and lacks and areas that should be further developed that are not yet in there. So among the measures in the Council recommendation, member states are asked, for example, to develop measures to fight multiple and structural discrimination, to promote active citizenship, including civic participation, in particular for Roma women and young people, measures combating early school leaving with a specific focus on Roma girls, measures in the area of employment support combined with income support, particularly for Roma women, measures to facilitate equal access to healthcare for Roma women, as well as to counseling and victim support services, as well as measures to ensure recognition and also reparation for past injustices, for example, forced and coercive sterilization of Roma women. So you can see that there has been, I think, a certain level of attention given to the gender and diversity dimensions of Roma equality policies. But of course, I would be interested in hearing your feedback also on these more concrete elements of the Council recommendation. And to just very briefly give you an update of where we currently stand with the frameworks. Many of you will be aware already, but it can be interesting for some of the participants. Member states have adopted between last autumn and this summer their national strategies and have submitted these to the Commission. And the Commission has assessed these frameworks and will very shortly adopt its assessment report. Still this year, I would expect it to be published still in December. And it's in this report that you will find our assessment of the national strategic frameworks, including the Hungarian one, against the objectives and criteria of which I just outlined a few. And this report will take stock of the measures included in the national strategies and also provide guidance on how things can be improved where improvement is needed. As I mentioned at the start, at the current point, I'm unfortunately not able to share details about the contents of this assessment because it's still awaiting political approval. So I would ask you for your patience for maybe just a few more days and wait for the report to be published. And I would also like to underline a point mentioned by Marina, which I think is very, very important, the Roma Civil Monitoring Project, which has been prolonged until 2025, as we have also asked civil society to produce their own assessment of the national strategic frameworks in order to complement our institutional assessment with independent monitoring. Several of the assessments of the new strategic frameworks are already published on the Roma Civil Monitoring website, including the ones for Hungary. So I think this can be interesting for you to have a look at. And I also very much appreciated Marina's suggestion to introduce a stronger gender perspective into this monitoring, and that's certainly worth consideration. And I would also be interested in hearing in a bit more detail of how you think this could best be achieved. And maybe to finally provide once again broaden a bit the perspective from or look at member states, but not just at Hungary. I would like to give some examples of measures or elements that are included in some of the national strategic frameworks, because these can be really very, very different. To quote, for example, Austria. Austria has defined empowerment of Roma women and girls as a priority in its national strategies. strategy with measures that include, for example, life, health, and social counseling by Romnia for Romnia. France has included an indicator to monitor the number of Roma women benefiting from a specific program, the CBEL program, which promotes integrated access to both housing and employment. And I guess Anna will maybe better than I know about the Spanish strategy, which has both a distinct section focusing on gender equality, as well as a horizontal gender dimension under its non-discrimination objective, also in the part on education, on employment, and on health. And while, of course, these examples are not representative, and I think they can give you a taste for the different types of measures that member states have adopted. And one of the questions by Anna, I think, which is very valid, well, the strategies are adopted, but what can we do now to improve? I would like to underline that indeed we are still at the start of this 10-year period, and the Commission will monitor implementation. We have this parallel monitoring through civil society, and this will, I think, also give us the opportunity to provide guidance on where improvements are needed, and also to support peer learning and exchange of experience between member states. For example, at our regular meetings, we have the National Roma Contact Points meeting, the European Platform for Roma Inclusion, and I think these meetings can be fora also to look at the gender dimension and how to better promote equality and rights of Roma women and girls. To give just 2 examples, and then I'll end. We had an NRCP meeting, National Roma Contact Point meeting, in last year, in which member states discussed how to strengthen gender equality and fight multiple discrimination under the new EU Roma strategic framework. And at the last European Platform for Roma Inclusion in Prague this October, actually, we invited member states to nominate at least one representative of a Roma woman or youth organization as participants, to ensure that their voices are actually part of the discussion. And I believe that exchanges such as these can also in future be helpful to improve the implementation of national policies. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Marc. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to open up the Q&A in a minute. So please submit your questions either in the Q&A function of Zoom, or just share it via the chat function. But before we would do so, I would like to give the floor back to Marina for a minute to reflect on the comments of Anna and Marc. Marina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Well, I think 1 minute, unfortunately, will not be enough to answer all of the questions. But thank you so much, Anna and Marc, for the remarks and also the reflections that you had, especially when it comes to the missing points and where it could improve. I definitely find it useful. Maybe I would first start with Anna's reflections and questions, and maybe I will not address everything, Anna, but I'm sure that in the future we will find time to have a discussion. So when it comes to whether the Hungarian national social integration strategy is actually connected to any gender or LGBTQ plans, well, I think it's very unfortunate to say that gender and LGBTQ issues are very ignored in Hungary, and even, punishable to be a Roma lesbian woman, or even, to stand up for LGBTQ issues or feminism. So I think we cannot speak about any gender plan or LGBTQ plan when it comes to Hungary. However, when it comes to any other plans that is connected to this social integration strategy, there is definitely one plan, and it's more connected to the disadvantaged settlements that we have. I don't know if Daniel maybe knows in English the whole title. It's basically this plan is designed for improving the disadvantaged settlements that we have in Hungary, and specifically there are regions which are really poor, and there could be, there should be more economic integration. So we have such plan, and actually the Hungarian the integration strategy refers to this plan, and also mentions that Roma people will be also beneficiaries of the measurements that are under this plan. When it comes to housing, thank you so much, Anna, for pointing out. Actually, I just had a short conversation with my friend here about like that housing is very much missing from the whole strategy. So it's not, you know, that I don't think that it's not important when it comes to Roma women and, you know, having a housing issue or being a homeless Roma woman is it raises a lot of concerns and a lot of issues, you know, and additional intersectional discrimination to the person. When it comes to housing, there is no specific reference to Roma women or girls, so it's also the result of the strategy. However, I believe that when it comes to disadvantaged people, housing is mentioned there, and especially we have some housing programs in Hungary, which are aiming to provide social housing basically, and also like in the countryside, you know, we have many houses which are left behind because the migration is very huge. So we have actually special housing programs. However, these programs like these are designed in such a way that only just a few percentage of the Roma population can actually access these housing benefits. When it comes to migrant Roma women, thank you so much again, Anna, for pointing out. Actually, the whole paper was written before the Ukrainian war. So I am sure that, of course, and I also worked on it, so I would have addressed for sure the issues of migrant and refugee Roma women, because I think it's an issue and it's a topic that cannot be avoided in Hungary anymore. I think before we didn't have so much refugees, especially talking about Roma women or Roma refugees. But after the Ukrainian war started, there is a huge, there is a mass migration to Hungary, of course, because we are neighboring countries. So their situation is unfortunately precarious, and we are hearing about testimonies which are very horrible, so that they are facing in multiple discrimination because of their vulnerability and also their gender, and also because of their race as well, because they are Roma. So it is a huge issue, and I hope in the future I can maybe address this element as well. When it comes to Marc and what can we do after adopting the strategies, I think there are still hope, and there are still tasks that we should do, because as I remember, there are actually updates of the previous Roma, I always say Roma, but actually it's a social integration strategy. So every 4 years, if I'm not mistaken, or every 5 years, there is an upgraded version of the previous, the given strategy. So I think if we start to work on it now, I mean the Hungarian government and the experts that are working there, then there could be many improvements to make, also when it comes to gender sensitivity and implying a gender sensitive approach as well. And also I think it would be necessary for the Roma Civil Monitor to have a more gender sensitive approach than the previous one, because the implementation is just starting now. So it is still not too late to look at the RCM guidelines and to update them, and of course in the future to use them for monitoring. Thank you so much for now, and I'm looking forward to the questions of the audience.
Thank you so much, Marina. I think we can start with 2 questions practically addressed to all 3 of you. And I would like to start with an excellent question of Erika Schlager, who is a long-time former expert of the US Helsinki Commission and one of the best US experts when it comes to the rights of the European Roma community. So Erika, really thank you for being with us today. And she's asking that after the murder of George Floyd, the European Parliament adopted a resolution calling for more transatlantic engagement on efforts to advance equity and inclusion. Do you think that transatlantic engagement on these issues is helpful, or it is non-helpful, or it is just not needed? How do you assess EU-US discussions in this area? And just adding one phrase from my end. So whether you see any opportunity practically for transatlantic cooperation when it comes to enhancing the rights and the equal treatment of either Roma women or more generally women with color. So this would be our first question. And the second question, I think, Marina, you have been particularly straightforward. What would be needed to enhance the equality of Roma women in Hungary? A governmental approach would be needed, which is based on gender mainstreaming and intersectionality. I think if we take a look on the mainstream political dynamics in Hungary, and particularly how the gender issue is exploited and instrumentalized for the purposes of cultural war and deepening dividing lines in the society, then I think, and it's my conclusion, it's not necessarily a feasible expectation to think that the Hungarian government will adopt such an approach anytime in the near future. And here's my question. Do you see any opportunity for non-governmental political actors? I am not speaking about the civil society, but first and foremost, cities, municipalities, local governments to adopt their strategies according to that premises. I am aware that municipal competences at the field of healthcare, education were really actively curtailed over the past decade. And are not widespread. Potentially at the field of housing and social issues, competencies are a bit broader. But generally, the question is, particularly in Hungary, to you, but in a broader and not necessarily national context, given form to all three of you, where do you see the role of non-state municipal actors in that regard? And I think, Marina, you should start with answering the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the questions. I would just quickly answer them because I know Anna and Marc also would like to contribute. So when it comes to the transnational cooperation and whether there is a need even for that, I do think that there is a need, because it wasn't, I think, like a coincidence that why after the death of George Floyd, actually, the Commission adopted the non-discrimination and the anti-racism action plan. And it is because that racism is not only the problem of the African Americans, it is not only for the problem for the Roma people, but it's a worldwide issue. So we can see that what happens in one continent, it also influences the whole world. So when it comes to solutions as well, I think we have a change of ideas always, because we are traveling, we are living in a global society. So I think transnational cooperation is very much needed. And when it comes to the Roma people's histories and the challenges that we face, we can see a very big similarity with the African American population as well. So I'm also myself interested in how we can cooperate with each other and what are the challenges that we face and how we can maybe solve them together. So I think there is a huge need for that. And when it comes to, Dania, your question, actually it's something which I haven't really thought about while writing my paper, but it's a very interesting idea. And I think it could work, because I do agree with you that nowadays, at the moment, you know, in Hungary, we cannot speak about the gender mainstreaming strategy because we're just in such a backlashed situation that it, unfortunately, I also have to say that it will not be possible. However, when it comes to local communities, when it comes to specific cities, for instance, which are maybe more open and maybe more multicultural, so they acknowledge the need for having, for instance, a Roma women strategy, or not only for a Roma women strategy, but having a non-discrimination strategy in general, that would work. And I think that is maybe something that is more needed on the local level, because Roma women and the Roma population is still in Hungary, is more frequent or more dense in the disadvantaged areas. in the rural areas. Of course, we have in the capital as well, but not as much as we have in the rural areas. So I think that's something that could work. And if I'm not mistaken, the Commission recently just awarded an award for cities which have good practices. I'm not sure exactly what was the title of the award. So actually, there is a practice of awarding and keep in mind these best practice cities. So I think it's already working. Maybe we have less best practices in Hungary, but it's definitely something that we can look out for and also to initiate more of these cooperations.
Thank you so much, Marina. Anna, Marc, would you like to chime in? Anna, please go ahead.
Yes, I completely agree with Marina about the transatlantic cooperation, but not only with US, with North America and also South America. There are also many Roma communities that left Europe during the Holocaust and even during the 60s or 70s that they migrate to South America and also to North America, and also to I think is some kind of exchange is needed with also another minorities, the indigenous communities. I was 2 weeks ago in Canada for this International Holocaust Conference, and there were 30 panels. Only my presentation was dedicated to the Roman Sinti genocide, and only one presentation was dedicated to the indigenous genocide. And I could see so many similarities, between Roma and the indigenous groups. So I think this cooperation is needed between Roma in Europe, Roma in North America, South America, Central America, and also with Afro-Americans and indigenous groups. For sure is needed, and how to learn, what is working there could it work here, because George Floyd work, it was the image in the whole world. But for example, the Roma person, Stalinov murder in the Czech Republic, nobody heard about him, and also in Spain is the same thing. Regarding your question about the non-state municipality action, I completely agree. I'm living in Barcelona. We are currently working in our local strategy. We did have the first one, 2015, 2020, and now we are currently working on the local one. We also have regional strategy. So we have like multi-level strategies. We have the Spanish one, regional one, and local one in our case. Important, yes. Sometimes you get more on the local level because it reaches more the people, but also you have to make sure it doesn't go against each other, because sometimes governments are from different political parties, and what is writing on the national one that is supposed to go to the regional and to the local level is, I'm not going to say it's against, but it's no coordination between the strategies. And at the end, if you want to improve the lives of the Roma at all levels, somehow it has to be some connection or coordination. But I think that it works. Many issues is not working because when we are working on the local strategy, they say this is like something to do with the state level. So it's also this kind of conflicts, but for sure that you can get a lot of improvements, at least on the local level. So I completely agree. And there are more open, there are some municipalities that are quite more open than in the case of Hungary, the national government.
Thank you so much, Anna. Marc?
Thank you very much. Well, I don't actually have so much to add because I mostly agree with what was already said. First of all, on the international dimension, of course, I agree that it's important to foster exchange of experiences so that we can learn from each other, and it's also a global challenge that has to be tackled not just by one or a few actors. And Marina mentioned indeed the EU anti-racism action plan, which was adopted actually shortly before the EU Roma strategic framework, and of which the the EU Roma framework was the first deliverable on the side of the Commission to tackle one specific aspect. And as part of this this anti-racism action plan, the Commission has committed to engage with international actors to develop partnerships with international organizations, also bilateral partners. Well, the Commission also nominated the first EU anti-racism coordinator, who at the current point engages bilaterally with her counterpart at the US State Department, who is the Special Representative for Racial Justice and Equity. So this goes beyond just Roma inclusion, but more broadly in to equality and anti-racism policy. And yeah, at the same time, it's true that these exchanges and this type of cooperation is still in the early stages. So I think there will probably be more to come. Specifically in the area of Roma equality policy, it's true that so far, when looking beyond the EU's borders, we have engaged mostly with neighborhood countries who often face very similar challenges, and where we also have a way of engaging through the enlargement negotiations to promote and encourage positive developments. And in the forthcoming Commission assessment report on the national Roma strategic frameworks, you will also find a chapter on the situation in neighborhood countries, but only in the neighborhood countries. It doesn't go beyond that currently in the international dimension. And looking at the role of the local level, again, I agree that I think for many challenges, municipalities and regions can play a very important role. By the way, the European Committee of the Regions has issued an opinion on our EU Roma strategic framework, where of course they call for a stronger engagement of the local level, and the rapporteur for this opinion is a Hungarian local politician, Jacint Horváth. So it might also be interesting maybe to explore to what extent, I simply am not aware to what extent he is maybe also active locally in his municipality in this area, but this could be interesting to explore. And I think it can indeed be a good way to promote good practices from the local level by looking at some promising, inspiring examples. And Marina again mentioned our award, the European Capitals for Diversity and Inclusion, of which the first edition was launched last year, and which had a specific thematic focus on Roma equality and inclusion in one of the award categories. So thank you. That was it from my side for now.
Thank you so much, Marc. If I may also add one thought from my end, I think when it comes to transatlantic cooperation, then of course a part of the desire, the main question is always the substance and the form. And I don't know, Erika, whether you are still with us or not, but I think that the last year was particularly very successful when we see through the lens of transatlantic parliamentary cooperation, because the Parliamentary Alliance Against Kleptocracy was established. So I think there are certain blueprints which could be used as potential institutional formats, even, for example, for the purpose of coordination on the issues of equality and combating discrimination, if there is political appetite, for example, in the Congress of the United States, in the European Parliament, or potential even among national MPs who might be interested in such a work. We are slowly approaching the end of our webinar, but if you allow me, I just would like to pose further two very, very brief questions to Marina, because I'm always a bit puzzled if we speak about strategies, but in the same time, we see that practically the national policies which are implemented are actually pointing in the opposite direction than what would be the goals based on the strategies. And over the past couple of years, there were several important changes in the Hungarian institutional field of equal treatment, anti-discrimination, and even educational segregation. And in that regard, I just would be very briefly interested in your assessment. How do you see the abolishment of the Equal Treatment Authority at the beginning of 2021 in Hungary, and practically also the spreading form of outsourcing ethnic discrimination into the formats of religious education institutions? and the famous example of Roma pastoralism, which practically creates a legal exception in the Hungarian educational framework to have ethnically segregated, exclusively Roma classes in church education institutions. So just very briefly, what do you think? How do these examples fit into the main goals of the Hungarian national integration strategies? Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. And yeah, your questions are actually very, very good and very, very interesting. And yeah, when it comes to the abolishment of the equality institution, actually, I still remember I was part of one of the first like facilitators who were trained to engage with this authority, actually, because what we can see that they needed mediators. Back then in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, I had the training to be a mediator, and I found it very interesting, and it was so nice that actually there is an equality institution that you can turn to if you face any kind of discrimination, not only ethnic discrimination, but religious, sexual, whatever discrimination as well. So everyone, I think, was very happy, and the Roma people and also other minorities, they were very welcome this initiative. And then suddenly this institution was abolished, and we were like, okay, so what's happening now? First of all, why it was abolished? Is it not an important non-discrimination issue? Is not an important thing in Hungary? And where we can now turn to? Because when it comes to the judicial system in Hungary, we can also see that it can be sometimes biased. So we had also cases with that. So I think this was a clear sign that non-discrimination is just growing in Hungary. And now by losing this institution, we even lost a practical tool again. So now we have to take more efforts, when it comes to Roma activists and also Roma rights activists specifically, who are working on cases and who are taking cases to the court, that we lost another tool basically to fight against discrimination, which I think is very unfortunate. And when it comes to your second question about from ethnic discrimination to religious education, that's a very sensitive and I think very rich discussion again. I remember a few years ago, again, just, I'm going back with my memory, because I grew up in Nyíregyháza, I studied there, and there we have a very famous, unfortunately very famous segregation case when in the Roma ghetto, there was the religious, the church basically opened a school which was dedicated only for Roma pupils, and there was low quality education, there were a lot of problems. And then the Roma rights activists, where I also belong to, we raised petitions, we took the case further, and what we faced with that, the church had such a huge power in this hand and such a huge support from the Hungarian government that it was almost impossible to abolish this segregated school. And once it happened, because of course the higher court realized that and acknowledged as well legally that this school was segregated, and it's illegal to maintain a segregated school in Hungary, even if it is maintained by the church. Then somehow this school still is in place, and Roma children are still studying there, and it is almost impossible to get rid of it, unfortunately. So you can see that the power is abused, even if it's done by the name of God, which I think is very problematic, because you shouldn't use the religious purposes or the religious beliefs for any segregation. And unfortunately, it's still happening in Hungary, not only in Hungary, of course, but that we can see that the church, the Christian church, has a huge power, which is very much connected to government decisions and intentions, and they are misused very much.
Thank you so much, Marina. I think that was an excellent closing word. So thank you for you, Anna and Marc, for this very, very insightful and great conversation, and for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks also for you, and I would like to call your attention to our next event, which will be a hybrid panel discussion exactly in a week, next Monday, with the title War and the Future in Europe. And if you are interested in the potential post-war scenarios shaping the Central Europe region, join us in person in Berlin or follow the live stream online. Stay tuned and goodbye. Thank you for being with us. Bye.